Buonasera a todos. Antes de comenzar, yo me voy a probar a hablar en español un poquito. Yo soy muy feliz de haber una oportunidad por nosotros de escucharnos esta presentación, esta lección de nuestra visitor, señora Karmen Alvárez, que es una persona muy calificada por este tema, porque es una persona que cientista política de más buenas instituciones de política de ciencia política en español complutense, también una persona con gran experiencia de diplomatía. This is my humble try to say hello and briefly to greet our guest in my humble and more than modern Spanish. But anyway, I'm more than grateful. Actually, really, I will repeat it to start in official language here to our today's guest, Ms. Carmen Alvarez. As I said already, she is really more than qualified to really, at the very precise time, at the very actual time, when the internal development within the Spain are very interesting, to give us some overview of the 40 years of democracy, as she said, of the Spanish Constitution, which is, as you will see, for many different reasons, very interesting for our long-lasting transition already. And as I told, she's a person who is our colleague in the sense that she graduated at the Complutense, the famous Spanish school for political sciences, but also as the person who is working for a long time in diplomacy, knows, let me say, a little bit more than regular political science and so on. She's now working, of course, as a number 2 in the Spanish embassy here, and we are really very happy to have her today. And before I give the floor to her, I have the need to thank to our colleague Rajko Petrovic, who really facilitated, organized and helped us to have Carmen today with us. Thank you very much for coming to us, and please, Stevan will lead our today's conversation.
Since Misha said it all, I won't take more of your time. Once again, welcome to the Institute of European Studies. I'm obliged to again say that which are the rules of engagement. You will be speaking for around 45 minutes or briefer if you wish, and then we will have the Q&A session, so please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I hope the next time I come I'll be able to speak a little bit of Serbian, but for the moment I cannot say anything more than Dobar dan and hvala for coming. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Rajko, for making it possible. As my colleague said, my idea is to speak about 40 minutes. I'll try to focus on 2 things. Firstly, a little bit of history about how we reached the Spanish Constitution, and afterwards the content or the basic lines of it. I know we have questions and answers in the end, but in the moment you have any questions, you can raise a hand and stop me. I come from Israel, and I'm very used to be stopped in the middle of a chat, so if you don't understand anything or think I should be stopped, just do it. So, last year in 2018 we celebrated the 40 years of the Constitution, which was passed in 1978, but I have to go a little bit back to beginning, to 1936. As you may know, it's the year that the Spanish Civil War took place. In the 18th of July of 1936, the General Franco and part of the army did a coup d'etat, which began a 3-year civil war, which I won't go in, but it led to the so-called Franquismo, which is Franco's dictatorship. The main characteristic or the main lines of the dictatorship, as you can read, is basically it's an authoritarian regime in political science, with difference that from totalitarianisms like Stalin's or Hitler's because of many reasons. It's basically anti-communism, which is the reason why it lasted so long and it had the back of the West. It's basically anti-liberal, national Catholic, which was like the main ideology of Franco, if we can call it an ideology, and very personalistic. It's a one-party system. The party was called the National Movement, el Movimiento Nacional. It had one only trade union and one only political party. But there were very diverse political families, from the Opus, which was linked to the church, to Falange, which is linked to other political movements. So it was basically pragmatic. From 1939 to 1975, the year in which Franco died, there were diverse political groups and lobbies which occupied the power. And this, we can call it constitution with I don't know, remember the name in English? Yeah. But there's a corpus of laws which are called the fundamental laws, las leyes fundamentales, which were the legal access of the regime. There's three basic phases when we study the Franquismo. The first, it was an autarky. It was absolutely protectionism. It was bring to itself. The second stage in the 60s and 70s, I couldn't translate desarrollismo. Desarrollo is development. It was like developism, if it exists in English. And the late years of Franco, in which the regime came back to the darkest moments. So this is the 60s and the 70s. I was trying to show you a little bit of how was it about this. As you may know, this is the Portuguese Carnation Revolution in 1975. So it was the years of a little bit of light of liberalism in the regime. This is Mocedades, a Spanish group in Eurovision. We had lots of tourism coming to our beaches, so we have the Swedish influence, the Northern Girls, so there was a little bit of freedom in terms, and this is a typical photo we all have of our family with that car, and which is not that different from other parts of Europe, I guess. The last years on the other side were completely diverse. We have two moments which were very important for the regime. The murder of Carrero Blanco, who was the prime minister at the time. He was murdered by ETA in a very famous atentado, bombing. He had a lap bomb on the car, and it was during a raid in the middle of Madrid. And after that, of course, the repression made by the regime was terrible. Also, the trial of Burgos was the trial of, I think it's seven terrorists from ETA, from the terrorist group which was born in those days. And it's very famous because there was an international campaign about the repression of Franco during that days. So we had to wait until November the 20th of 1975 when we witnessed the death of Franco. He died as an old man of illness. And this is some scenes of his funeral, which was attended, by the way, by thousands of people. What happened after Franco? This is two very famous images. This is the prime minister of the time, sent a very famous sentence in Spain, Españoles Franco ha muerto, Spaniards, Franco has died. And the moment in which the King Juan Carlos was proclaimed in the 22nd of November of 1975, just 2 days after the death of Franco. Juan Carlos was already appointed as the head of state by Franco in the succession law, one of the 7 laws of the movement I told you before. And he was very criticized, or it has been very criticized, because he, in a certain way, was a heritage for Franco's regime. But it's important to read the speech he gave that day, when he said, "Shall all understand with generosity and height of view that our future will be based on an effective consensus of national harmony." Of course, now, more than 40 years after, we understand the role that the king had on the transition to democracy, but on that days, one must figure that he was considered like a heritage of Franco. So these lines are important. After the regime, there were 2 options. From the inside, we have the so-called bunker. Bunker, I'm not sure if it's an English word. It means shelter. It's the word that we used to when Hitler was, yeah, bunker is fine, okay. So in the bunker, we had, of course, all the forces which considered that the regime should stay exactly the same. It was immobilized, and we had the most part of the army, the trade union, Falange, and the Movimiento, the party. Inside, as part of Franco's regime, but with a certain will of reform, were 2 kind of reformisms. The mild ones with Fraga, who became he was a ministry during the Franco. It's this guy down. and he was very relevant during the transition. And those who thought that the system should be absolutely changed, but from the regime. For example, with Torquato Fernández Miranda, we will see who he is. He was a very relevant person during the transition. From the outside, we had two basic movements of oppositions to the regime, which were some of them in exile, not all of them. We had the Junta Democrática, which was led by the Communist Party. The Junta was founded in 1974 in Paris, and we find in this junta monarchics, but basically it's people who become from the communist sphere, like Comisiones Obreras, the trade unions, communist trade unions, some socialists, and the Communist Party. On the other side, we had the Plataforma of Convergencia, which was led basically by the socialists. It was founded in 1975, and we can find there the Democristians, the Liberal, and other. These two different movements agreed in one platform called the Plata Junta, which agreed basically in several points: the end of dictatorship, the amnesty to all political prisoners, the legislation of political parties and trade unions, and let the exiles come back from Spain, and of course the elections. The main point about this Plata Junta is that in the moment they joined, they renounced to the way of the Communist Party in the beginning wanted to create a new regime through strikes, through social movement, and at that moment they decided to create an agreed break, if I explain myself. So there's what I call a few good men. There are four men who were absolutely relevant for the transition to democracy. The president of the Council of the Kingdom was Torquato Fernández Miranda, who was a man of law. He was the professor of King Juan Carlos on laws, and he is considered, he's considered to be the real thinking mind beyond the transition to democracy. Of course, the role of King Juan Carlos during the transition is absolutely essential. The head of government, we had after the death of Franco, the head of government was Arias Navarro, but in 1976, Adolfo Suárez, who is the basic executor of the transition to democracy, became president. And in order to deal with the army, General Gutiérrez Mellado, who became also the Ministry of Defense during Adolfo Suárez's government. Those are the four men without whom we couldn't understand the transition from dictatorship to democracy. And if there's one event which is absolutely essential to understand the transition, is the law for political reform. The law for the political reform is one of the 8 Franco's of laws. Even after the death of Franco, is in the corpus of Franco's laws. It was an amazing law because it's a law in which the parliament under the laws, the Franco's regime, decided to commit suicide. In that law, they said that the parliament would disappear, that they would go for election, and they end with all the laws precedent. It is very difficult to try to explain the transition in a few minutes. Basically, the effort of diplomacy to convince all the diverse parts of the parliament, the so-called parliament, and of the society linked to the regime to pass this law is amazing. And this is something that we only can, the main responsible are Adolfo Suárez and Gutiérrez Mellado. Gutiérrez Mellado especially because the army was very reluctant to any kind of change to democracy. The 18th of November, the parliament, as I say, committed suicide. They passed 4,035 members of parliament. I'm saying parliament, but you understand I refer to the court that was the parliament created under Franco's regime. Voted yes to the law for political reform, only against 59 no's and the 13 abstentions and 24 who didn't go even to vote. And it was passed by referendum. These are part of the campaign that was published during the referendum. Habla pueblo means speak people, your voice is your voice, abstenidos it's in Catalan, which meant that you should abstain. Basically only some regionalist movements and the opposition did abstain. but the results are here. It's a 94.17% of the people in referendum said yes, and at 77.8% of the census did go to vote to the referendum. Anyway, after the parliament passed the law for the political reform, there were two main events that put in danger the transition. First of all, it was the Black Week of January. We're in 1977, sorry, I forgot. The law for political referendum was in 1977. There was an increase of violence both by the extreme right and the extreme left. It all began with the murder of some pro-amnesty protesters by Fuerza Nueva, which was a very far-right political movement. The Atocha slaughter, there were 7 lawyers from a left office of lawyers in Madrid who were murdered in their office. It's relevant because the whole Communist Party and the people from the left went to a demonstration, and it was a kind of fire test to see if the street is going to be violence. If you see and I recommend you to search for the images in YouTube, there already were. There was thousands of people who protested in the streets of Madrid in absolute silence. And these are the images precisely of the funeral. This is the cars of the funerals with the corpse of the lawyers. And it was an absolute silence from the people. So after that, you will see people respected the communists in Spain because of the effort they made to resist any kind of provocation. In the middle of this storm, we had 2 terrorist groups kidnapping and killing people. Grapo, which was from the left, far left, and ETA, who hadn't stopped to kill from the beginning. They had already 50 dead people, especially police and Guardia Civil, the military police. So the second moment, dangerous moment in the transition, in which everything could have come down, is the Red Holy Saturday, we called it. It was the legalization of the Communist Party, especially after what I told you about the Atocha's funerals. The president couldn't avoid the legalization of the Communist Party. But it was a promise the president had done to the army that he would never legalize the Communist Party. Remember, we had 30 years of saying that the communists were the devil. There were people in Spain who thought they were really devils it was so clear, and the army was absolutely enemy of that. So what the president did was to pass the law that permit the legalization of the Communist Party in the Holy Saturday, which in 9th of April, in which half of Spain was in holiday, or it was in the villages, so that's true. So it was declared legal in a moment when everyone was at home eating with their families, and it was a very dangerous moment because they thought that the army or the right movements would do a coup d'etat, but fortunately they didn't. Because of the law for the political reform, we had elections. The elections were to constituent parliaments, and this is basically the results. As you can see, 2 main parties appeared. USTD, which was the Unión Centro Democrático, Union of Democratic Center. It's the party whose leader was Suarez, the president, who got almost the 35% of the votes, and the Socialist Party of Spain with all of 30%. The communists went afterwards with 10%. APE is the right, who was the heritage of Franco's regime, and then we have PNV, who are the Basques, PDC, it's the Socialist Party, and others, but mainly 2 socialists and the center, which is the center right, were the winners of the elections. Here we have the 7 men who negotiated and wrote the draft of the constitutions. I won't go by all of them, but as you see, we have the 3 first, which are the 3 who are standing from UCD, from the party of Adolfo Suarez. We had one from the Catalan minority, Miquel Roca, Fraga, who came from Franco's regime, from Alianza Popular, one socialist, Gregorio Pérez Barba, and one communist, Jordi y su lectura. So it's a quite accurate representation of the parliament in that days.
By the way, Mr. Mignon visited Serbia in 2001, I think 2002, gave a beautiful presentation about the constitution issue. He was at the Faculty of Political Science.
Oh, that we're lucky because he's a very interesting man. Yeah, absolutely. And this is the 3 days which are relevant in the passing of the constitution. The first, I go here. The law was passed in the parliament. It's Adolfo Suárez with General Gutiérrez Mellado, almost crying. These are very emotional moments if you witness them in a video in October the 31st. Of course, we have the referendum of the Spanish people, the 6th of December, which is celebrated day in Spain. It's the day we don't work, we celebrate. The 87.8% of the votes were in favor of the constitution, with almost a 60% of participation. I thought I had noted down, but it's relevant because I know this will come afterwards, that the regions in which it had more back were some Andalusians one and the 4 provinces in Catalonia. More than 90% of Catalans did say yes to the constitution in the 4 provinces of Catalonia. On the other side, in Basque Country, the average in 3 provinces was around 75%, which was one of the minor backs. And the end of the process, the sanction by His Majesty the King before the Parliament on the 27th of December of 1978. And that's the first part of my presentation. So here we go with the contents of our constitution. I will go a little bit back also. As you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Only in the 19th and 20th century we had 9 different constitutions, or so-called constitutions. Between them we had civil wars, coup d'etats, slaughters of all kinds. So 19th century was a very turbulent one for the Spanish history. So luckily we can say that after that century we have stability thanks to the constitution and the Spanish transition to democracy. Some of the main lines of it is, first of all, it's popular. Of course, it comes from the sovereignty of the parliament. It's absolutely based on the consensus of the political parties in the parliament. It's a very long constitution. I think it's 189 articles, 169 articles in 11 titles. It's written against some other countries which have, as you know, oral constitutions are written, and it's quite rigid. The reforms, there's 2 kinds of reforms, the ordinary and the non-ordinary. Both are difficult, but especially the non-ordinary, which means those dealing with rights, with the preliminary title, they need 2/3 of the votes of the parliament, elections, and against 2/3 and a referendum. That's the way of changing like the basics of the constitutions. The ordinary reform process needs only 3/5 of the parliament's vote, but it is rigid. That's true. It's very influenced by 4 constitutions. The Italian, in that meaning, those things refer to the judiciary and the regional state. Very influenced by the Bonn Fundamental Law of 1949, in all related to rights and freedoms, especially the concept of the natural rights of the people, the social and democratic state, and the relations between government and parliament. Also, the French Constitution of 1958 it's important, basically because of the existence. It's a tiny thing, but the existence of so-called reglamentos, like small laws which develop the ordinary laws. And now the Portuguese Constitution of 1976 about on the area of fundamental rights and freedoms as the Bonn Fundamental Law. This is the structure of the Constitution. As most of the Constitution, it has a dogmatic part and a pragmatic part. We have, as you see, 11 parts, fundamental rights, and first of all a preamble and a preliminary part. Fundamental rights and duty, with all the rights linked to Spaniards, to aliens, to then the powers of the state, the crown, the parliament. We have 2, I'll go on down there. Government relations between government and parliament and the judiciary power. And after that, we have the parts that speak about economy and finance, territorial organization, which I know we will go down there, the constitutional court, and afterwards the way of reformation or reform of the constitution. So the preamble, it tells us who, what, and how. And it's quite clear in the PowerPoint, but I'll tell you a little bit who is the Spanish nation. That's undoubtable. What it's desiring to establish justice, liberty and security, and to promote the well-being of its member. What does it do, and how does it develop that? By democratic coexistence, the consolidation of a state of law, the exercise of human rights, the progress of, well, this is the kind of preamble of a constitution, of a Western constitution, nothing exceptional. The preliminary part is the one that says the basics of the state. It's a social and democratic state that's the influence of the German constitution under the rule of law. Article 1.2 states clearly that national sovereignty belongs to the Spanish people, from whose all state powers emanate, and under the form of a parliamentary monarchy. And Article 2 recognizes, together with the national unity, the term nationality. This is confusing in English, because in Spanish we have the concept of a nation, and they kind of invented the word nationality. Is not that clear, and it's been... you have a Serbian thing for that?
Yeah. It was in Yugoslavia.
It's Yugoslavia, yeah, you understand how, cannot you? So it recognizes and guarantees the right to self-government of the nationalities and regions of which is composed, and the solidarity among them. I'll go down. I mean, if you are interested in anything in particular, I can stop. But basically, the Article 9, I tried to focus on the basic articles, talks about that all citizen and public authorities are bound by the Constitution, and the principles of the Constitution: legality, hierarchy of legal provision, publicity, retroactivity, non-retroactivity of provisions, etc. Languages, which is something that is interesting for foreigners. The Article 3 states that Castilian is the official Spanish language of the state. All Spaniards have the duty to know it and the right to use it. But there are other Spanish languages that shall be official, which means the Constitution doesn't state which co-official languages are, but the self-governing communities, they can state that there's another language that be co-official, as we say. We consider languages in Spain as a cultural heritage, and we have it shall be especially respected and protected, as they are, by the way. So the political system established in the Constitution is basically a semi-parliamentarism. We have two houses of parliament, the Congress and the Senate. Of course, they represent the Spanish sovereignty. The Constitution is quite basic in that related to the House of Parliament. It's afterwards developed by the electoral law, the Congress law, and the Senate law. But just to say a few things, the Congress it currently has 350 members of Parliament. The Constitution says it must be between 300 and 400. They are elected every 4 years, and the electoral constituency is the province, which, by the way, doesn't appear in the Constitution, and I'll explain to you later. But now this is the province, which is this 1, 2, 3, the third level of in terms of region. Now we have the state, the communities, the provinces, and then the municipalities. Regarding the Senate, it's basically a territorial chamber, a territorial house. It's also a second reading institution in certain matters. It's also every 4 years, and it has it has a mixed way of election. There are certain senators which are elected directly from the people, by the people. They also by province electoral constituency, but there are others which are elected by the regional parliament. So it's a quite confusing institution in terms of how it's elected. The executive is government. The parliament is appointed by the president or prime minister, however you want to translate it. He's appointed by the parliament, so we have parliamentary election or presidential elections. He's the one who chooses the government. it's important that the president, it's not needed to be a parliamentary. Usually he is an MP, but it's not needed by the constitution. So once we have the parliamentary elections, the parliament chooses a president. I didn't go on how majorities are needed, but it's qualified majority, and if not, in 48 hours it's a simple majority, blah blah. Regarding the relations between the chambers, the parliament and the government, of course we have accountability in several ways of hearings. The parliament can ask the members of government to come to the parliament to express or to explain things. But we have two things which are relevant: the question of confidence, which can be raised by the president himself if he needs to, and a simple majority it's done. It doesn't happen very frequently, I must say. And the motion of censure, which happened, I'm not sure if twice or 3 times now, but lately, our current president, he got to power after a motion of censure. It must be proposed by 1/10 of the parliament, and it needs an overall majority and an alternative candidate, which is happening with our current president, President Sanchez. The third power of the state is, of course, the judiciary. Basically 2 lines. Justice emanates from people, that's constitutional principle. Judges and magistrates are independent, and they may only be dismissed, suspended, transferred, or retired on the grounds of the safeguards provided by law. We have pyramidal system of the judiciary. The head of the pyramid is the Supreme Court. There's jurisdictional unity, although we have, it's not regional courts what we have, but they are territorial in terms of they deal with the crimes committed in certain areas. And there are 2 bodies that are not part of the judicial power, although it's sometimes confused, people can get confused. The governing body of the judicial power, which is the General Council of the Judicial Power, it deals with the conditions of work of the judges and magistrates, and especially the Constitutional Court, which has an entire title in the Constitution, which only deals with 3 kind of things: the appeal of unconstitutionality of any legal provision. We had it recently, but if someone considers that even a law is anti-constitutional, it goes to the Constitutional Court. The individual appeals for protection, the so-called recurso de amparo, where you think you need protection from the state, and the conflicts of jurisdiction, which has occupied 90% of the issues by the Constitutional Court. And then, of course, we have the crown, which is not a power itself, but it's important that the king is the head of state. It's a power basically symbolical, which symbolizes unity and permanence of the state. It arbitrates and moderates the functioning of the institution, and it is the highest representation in international relation. It's relevant to say that all acts done or signed by the king are countersigned. I mean, there's nothing the king do without the sign of the Prime Minister, the Parliament, etc. For that reason, and only for that reason, the king, or the person of the king, is inviolable, and his actions are not accountable. So, as other parliamentary monarchies, it's basically a symbolical figure. And there we go with the territorial model, which I guess it's one of the main issues of interest in this country. The constitution doesn't draw the territorial model of Spain. What it creates is a frame for creating, the constitution says the lines for creating a territorial model, but doesn't even mention the regions of Spain. So as I said, it's a frame for decentralization, which is not closed or not fixed. It only says that there shall be 3 levels of competence: the state, the autonomous communities, and the local bodies. Reality is, after the legal development of this model, we have today 17 autonomous regions plus 2 autonomous cities, which are not here, and people from Ceuta and Melilla might kill me, but in the north of Africa we have 2 cities, autonomous cities. And each region has its own provinces, so we have 50 provinces and 8,125 local entities. As I said, the Constitution says that municipalities, provinces and self-governing communities may be constituted. We find three basic principles in the constitutions: the meaning of unity, the indivisibility of Spain, we saw in the article number 2. The other side is the autonomy. The power of the regions will have to handle competences they obtain, as long as they respect the law and the rest of the principle. We can find this both in the Article 2 and the 137. I brought you some constitutions in English in case someone is interested in getting deep on that. And the third pillar of the system is solidarity, which means it's the obligation to allocate more resources to those communities that need it, in addition to the prohibition of economic or social privileges. This is contained in Article 138 of our Constitution. What happened after the passing of the Constitution is that the territorial model developed in two speeds. The quick way, which was it's recognized in the Constitution and meant that it was thought for the so-called historical regions. So that I don't like that word because it can be false, but which is meant in reality is those regions who had a kind of statute in the past, even before Franco's regime, and they had already a certain autonomic structure. In reality, they were Catalonia, País Vasco, and Galicia. So they went in the quick way via the Article 151, and they got the huge amount of competences that could be under the regional power. Other communities immediately, like Andalucía, Navarra, Valencia or Canarias, followed similar way, and it was quite quick because and it's a very intricate and complicated way, but it's in the end of the Constitution. There's certain ways of going through the quick way without being a historical region, and that's what Andalucía, Navarra, Valencia and Canarias followed. And then the rest of the regions, we went the slow way. That's via the Article 143. So they had some basic competences. We were in the beginning, and 5 years afterwards they got more. The basic about the territorial model is that each community has their statute of autonomy. Their statute of autonomy is an organic law, so it must be passed by the parliament with a qualified majority, and it's like the basic law of that autonomous region. So it says the name, which are the competences, the parliament of that, the basic institutions in a regional level. Regarding the competences, all the Constitution does is to show a list of exclusive competences of the state, which are included in Article 149. And a list of competences that could be or shall be held by the communities. Then we have a mix of exclusive, share and concurrent, because there are certain competences that are not exclusive, but the state does the law, but the law of development is done, or the execution is by, it's a quite complicated model, but basically what you have to think is that there's a list of exclusive competences of the state in which you find basic things like foreign affairs, international relations, which also there's a part of international relations linked to tourism or commerce, which are held by the communities, but the army, the capacity of holding a referendum, for example, which is relevant today, that's one of the main exclusive state competences. And here we go, we finished. We are 40 years after that. What we find is, I don't want to go to a detail of the numbers and statistics of where we are, but we did consolidate the welfare state in the 80s. I didn't tell you the story after the democracy, but we can say it's a consolidated democracy since after the government of Suarez, which was the center-right. We had, in 1982, the socialists coming. Then we had Partido Popular, which is the right party. Then we had again left. I mean, we had until the last few years a two-party system based on Partido Popular and PSOE. Now we've witnessed the rise of two new parties. Podemos, which is goes on the left, goes on the left of PSOE, and Ciudadanos, which is a party who was born in Catalonia in the ambience of nationalism and has become a national party. And of course the appearance of Vox, which is a right party who appeared in the last elections in Andalusia. I'm not sure how you are in current affairs in Spain, but let's say. So basically, through these 40 years, we got into Europe, which was essential in our developing. We had full integration on basically all international bodies of our sphere. And what we have faced for the moment, in my opinion, and that's we had 30 years of terrorism by ETA, not only in the Basque Country but in all Spain, that only in the last few years stopped its activity. We have the economic crisis that happened in all the world, but we suffered especially. We had a very high rate of unemployment until recently. Unfortunately, things are coming better in the last few years. We did have a coup d'etat in 1983, the 23F, which was one member of the Guardia Civil entered the parliament, and it was happily resolved by in one day. And of course, you know the recent secessionist problems we are facing, which also it's a problem we have faced in the last few years. Unfortunately, it's being solved and it's being dealt with today, these days in the trial, which is being held in the Supreme Court in Madrid. But basically, we can say that the Constitution gave us 40 years not only of peace after a very bloody in terms of civil wars in the 19th and 20th century, but gave us the stability needed to become a real democracy and to enter the average of democracies in Europe. And that's all I have to say for the moment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. And now I would like to invite everybody who has questions to ask them. Please.
Hi, I'm Milan, a researcher here at the Institute. My question is about the Spanish-European integration in early and mid-80s. Of course, having in mind the different nature of the European community then and the European Union after Maastricht and after Lisbon, of course. Was it a transformative process for Spain? Was it more or less a foreign policy or foreign economic policy issue there? Was there a feedback from Europe in terms of the process of democratization and more liberal market economy and building of social welfare state? Was it a transformative process at all for Spain, or was it just a, let's say, bound to foreign policy reasoning? Was it similar to the process for the significance for Eastern Europe after 1991, or was it much less significant for Spain?
I understand the question. I understand. I think we weren't that far as, we didn't have communism through, so the step wasn't that high. We were already there in some way. Definitely in terms of economics, it was liberal capitalism, so we didn't have to jump that much. But it did in a certain way in culture, not only the fact of entering the European Union, but for example, I always say, and it sounds like a joke, but I think it's true, that the Erasmus grant and the Interrail, which is this train that all young people did in Spain for years, made a change of mentality, which was very important. Spain hadn't been isolated from Europe ever. I think Spain is one of the people, sincerely, that felt more European from the beginning. So it was like a matter of there was no party in Spain who didn't want the European integration. So we were very willing, but it did created an openness to Europe that we were not that much. Also because we have that mixed character of, we have like one feet in Latin America, because also they are like our cousins, it's our language, it's our heritage. But certainly, and it did. Economically, of course, we received the funds that changed the country always. and also in terms of fighting against corruption, of certain cultural ways of behaving in politics, although we have corruption as everyone. But I think it had an influence definitely.
Thank you.
What's the situation nowadays? Are there any Eurosceptics in the Spanish parliamentary system now, or is there populism on the rise that has something against the European Union, or is there something changed in that perception of the EU after 40 years of experience with the EU?
Yeah, I think we suffer, and that's my opinion. We suffer certain things that all European countries are facing, which is populism, and populism comes with Euroscepticism. And it's a certain fatigue, a certain tiredness of things. I mean, Europe is complicated, Brussels processes are complicated, and I think the European Union hadn't been able to communicate certain things. When you speak to people, for example, you find someone who works in agriculture, who's not realizing, who said, "Oh, we want to go out from Europe because bureaucracy, Brussels, blah blah blah." And then you speak to him, and I mean, I go quite frequently to the. I think you have to go to countryside to meet people, and you speak to them and listen. But you could fix your tractor, because you have these grants from the European Union, the park there, and then they understand what it means. Or even, I mean, we live with Brexit. Now, there's people now we have lots of Brits living in southern Spain and the beaches. And when you speak to them, like, what's going to happen with your house? And when you have to come with your pet, which needs a vet passport and it's going to be, and they don't understand. So, I mean, there's a certain, especially in certain areas of the population, Euroscepticism, but there's not a political party who says firmly that wants to go out from the European, none of them. Even if we have parties with taste of populism, they still keep saying that we have to change things in the European Union, not to say let's go out. I never heard a politician saying we have to get away from Europe, like directly. So there's raised some criticism on European Union, sometimes fair, sometimes not fair at all, but not that much as in other parts.
And what's the situation with the immigrants? Is it raising Euroscepticism more, or is it changing position of political parties toward this issue? The immigrants from North Africa.
We never, I mean, in Spain until recently, immigration hadn't been, I mean, even now, it's never been perceived as a problem. First of all, because we've been a country of immigrants for decades. Secondly, because of the migration we faced until recently, it's basically from Latin America, so there's no civilization clash. I mean, it's easier if you deal with immigration very similar to you. Third of all, because I guess because it's part of the Spanish personality. I mean, it's part of this. So it hasn't been an issue it hasn't been in the political agenda. But as I said, as populism rises, immigration is a key point in populism. I mean, it's one of the points of every populist movement on earth. So now it's beginning to be an issue, and especially, I mean, Spain. We never had the political problem, but the reality is that what Spain is facing regarding immigration coming from Africa, it's serious. I mean, it's something to discuss about, and it's an European problem. So it's now becoming something in the agenda. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your lecture, Slobodan Zečević. Tosca, you said that the Spanish nation is one, and you have nationalities inside the Spanish nation. That's what you told me. That's what you told me. I understand it, right?
In the constitution, yeah.
In the constitution, yes.
Yeah.
Because that excludes some separation or some separate nation or separate nation states. Because all the people in Spain are Spanish, in fact.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what are you asking?
It's not about this crisis about Catalonia, and according to the Spanish constitution, it's completely illegal.
It's completely illegal. I mean, the sovereignty of the Spanish sovereignty, it's one. I mean, the only way to ask people if you want to change the constitution in terms that a region could get independent is to change constitution. So who should be asked for that regarding the constitution is the Spanish people.
Yeah.
I answering
Yes,
the question.
in Yugoslavia we have different situation with
It's
the crowns,
completely different.
and
I understand.
And also I want to ask you about the king and his role in the political life of Spain, and if the role of Juan Carlos was different from Felipe today. I mean, what is the influence, and if there are some difference between Juan Carlos and today his son?
Yeah, they were at the. Most of the Spaniards, some years ago, before Juan Carlos abdicated, would say, "I'm not monarchist, I'm Juan Carlist," because he was a king who was beloved in that Syria. I mean, he passed the test of being someone who came from Franco's influence, which was never true, because Franco hated his father. He was raised as a Democrat, so he always thought that we would go this way. But he gained the Spanish people definitely. So also he was essential in the coup d'etat we had in 1983. So I mean, he was a very beloved king. So when he decided to abdicate, even if there was a crisis of, you remember, he was a crisis of his image. But even that, people were afraid, like, will we love the new king? But I think Felipe VI, firstly, he was educated for this, and you can see, and he had a very discreet role until he became a king. And I think he's doing, but that's my personal opinion, I think he's doing a perfect role. He's the symbol of unity. He had, when the so-called coup d'etat in Catalonia, he had a very relevant moment. He did a speech for the Spaniards that calmed down the situation, and I think it was fundamental for the stability of Spain, and especially for people to hear the king saying that the constitution is on force, and the rights of the people would be respected. It was especially relevant not only for all the Spaniards, but for the Spaniards in Catalonia who were frightened of how events were coming. And I am married to a Catalan, so I kind of know the situation there. So it was, I think he did a great speech that calmed down the things. And mainly, I'm not sure, I mean, the last polls about what people think about Felipe are quite positive. He's one of the institutions with more positively, but yeah, I mean, it's relevant, the character of the king, if you say, if it's relevant for the match, definitely. And we've been lucky because the two we have, I think they've done their role very professional.
Yes, because the role of Juan Carlos was unique, and I'm wondering if Felipe is on this level or...
It is being, I mean, and we were afraid, like, is he gonna be like, and I think we would agree that he's definitely a good king.
Bueno, Carmen, otra vez muchísimas gracias. Okay, I will speak now in English. We know that during all those years, Spain of transition, Spain had a lot of problems with separatism or secessionism in Basque Country, in Catalonia, even in Galicia, in a certain way. So, and we also know that the regionalization of Spain is one of the most important products of transition. And I'm interested, and it's basically something that I will explore in my dissertation, about a correlation between regionalism and separatism. How did regionalism affect separatism? And my second question is, generally, when we speak about separatism, which exists in a certain way, but in different ways in Basque Country and Catalonia, generally, is it increasing during all those years or not? Thank you very much.
Just, sorry, technically to add, could you give us a brief, let me say, constitutional development of the regionalism after the constitution? Because there were several reforms, as we know, when Catalonia got some new prerogatives and so on and so on. So actually, could you just give us technically what was going on?
It's very difficult.
I
No,
mean,
the process,
just briefly,
I go
because people
very
don't
briefly.
know here.
Very briefly, once the constitution was passed, as I told the historical communities, Galicia, País Vasco, and Catalonia acceded to, they created their autonomous communities, they gave a name, a statute of autonomy, they instituted a parliament, and each one has a parliament, has a president, has a govern, those who wanted to have a language, so that all was that in institute. As I told you, the autonomous statute is like the law that governs the autonomy, but it's a state law. As the president of each community, it's a member of the state, it's a representative of the state, not of the autonomous. This is irrelevant. And then, during the transition, and that's why this chapter was not really closed. It was like a frame to develop because it was a hard. They had enough things. They had to convince the left that we wouldn't go for a republic. We would go for So I guess that was like the main portion which they could agree. There was like a certain debate among the two Spanish sayings: "Café para todos," which means coffee for all. Like everyone would be more or less the same, and tabla de quesos, that's a cheese board, like to create a country. So there was two options: let's create a country with regions, but all are the same, or let's create a asymmetries. So they didn't solve that down. They say, who knows? We create the minimums, and you decide. So firstly, the historic communities, as I said. And I don't like that name, I'll repeat it. So, Catalonia, País Vasco, and I don't like it because other communities are historical as the others, so it's not an accurate name. That being said, afterwards, the other regions wanted the same, so they developed their own statute of autonomy. These statutes have been changed. There's been, and there are many competences that the state has, how to explain, to delegate to the communities, and basically it's been 30 years of delegation of the communities of the state to the regions. Is that or you need more? Yeah, you need more.
Well, some of the
What do you want me to
was that people don't know actually for Catalonia, which is of course the more cinematic one.
So
Ask actually what
then
were the
after
crucial
that,
changes?
Yeah. You mean la reforma del estatuto? That's what you want me to tell?
Yeah, or recently, what was the last time? 2012 when they had some new, I think.
No, they had in 2006 a new statute or Estatuto de Catalunya, and in 2010 court decided that it's...
So I'll answer you first because I think it's real, and then because that's special. Okay. Regionalism and separatism. I mean, in a unitary state, would you have independent movements? I mean, I have no idea. In a regional state or autonomous state, my point, and that's, no, it's my point, I mean, this kind of model needs loyalty it's a model that can work perfectly. You have certain loyalty to the state. If that loyalty lacks, you can have when we are now. But separatism is a very legitimate ideology. I mean, I'm absolutely respectful of whoever wants to have a separate region, and they are their rights, and the Spanish state and democracy allows that. It is easier to create a population or the feeling of separatism when you have your own, when a region is controlled by a nationalist party. Definitely. I mean, that's not a matter of Spain anywhere. If you have medias, you have 90% of the competences of what happens in real life. I mean, the real thing is the Spanish state, the exclusive competences are very low now. I mean, we have the state that itself, it has the army, the foreign affairs, and very few things. Most of the things are now delegated to migration. But yeah, but migration also, I mean, everything is so-so because the executive part is autonomous. So in the moment you have communities who are, or political parties who are loyal to the idea of states, nothing should, yeah.
If I can say just 2 words. My point was that, for example, in Basque country, we had ETA, even in the time of Franco, and when Spain started their reforms after Franco's death, ETA even intensified their activities, but when the Basque country was created as a region with many derogated stuffs. For example, they can collect their taxes.
There's no other region like the
Yes.
Basque country
Yes, that's the problem with
on the world, all
They,
over the world.
they have their flag, their language, euskera, which they can use. Healthcare system, social system, many things, and I was comparing all those stuffs, and my conclusion is that now we have more than ever so many Basques who doesn't want to leave Spain, who wants to stay in Spain, and I think that during all
Because
those
the
years,
decentralization, that's your point.
yes, that they are happy because they can.
What about Catalonia then?
Well, it's something completely different.
I don't agree with your point, but that's
Okay.
personal. I understand. In a rational way, you think, okay, if you give the regions competences, their own, there won't be any nationalism. No, it didn't happen. I mean, and this is very personal, my idea of nationalism in general, not in Spain speaking, is that it doesn't matter how much you give. A nationalist will still be a nationalist. It's difficult to give more competences to the Catalonian government. It's very difficult. There's not many things that, I mean, and the Basque, it's impossible directly. But what happened in the Basque country, they had 40 years of terrorism, of living, I mean, we suffered terrorism in Madrid and bombings, but they had a atmosphere which was unbreathable, seriously. So just it's people with money, educated, they have their lives, and after 3 decades they say, I want to live my life and have my kids. I don't want to be bothering about if we belong, not belong. I mean, identity stuff, obsessions, one day stops because people, especially where people live well. I mean, why going to an adventure? I mean, anyway, I'm not talking in Spain precisely, but when once you have a good life and then you have family and you have real problems, you don't want to be in theoretical things if we were or we weren't. So my opinion is that in the Basque country, first of all, ETA was fight and defeated by the state, especially by the police and by the intelligence and by the, first of all, and in the moment, and by the people. I mean, we had 1 million demonstrations against ETA when they killed Miguel Ángel Blanco. For those who don't know, the last of the last greatest things ETA did was to kidnap a poor guy of 20 years old and to tell Spain that in 48 hours we had to give all the prisoners to the País Vasco, and they finally killed him. It was terrible. I mean, all Spain, we remember what we were doing in the moment Miguel Ángel Blanco was shot dead. So millions of Spaniards went out. It was like the point the Basque couldn't, for more than enough is enough, that's it. Regarding the Catalan, so in your discourse, in your speech, you say, okay, so it would be everything. I mean, we have now like, what, 40% of in Catalonia people who would at least go for a referendum in Catalonia to decide their future. No, but we can solve that if we give them more. Now, I don't think that's logical. It doesn't work.
Yes, Jovica Pavlic, also from this institute, a research worker. You mentioned identity in your last answer, and this is something I want to tie to constitutionalism, especially in the sense that there is a feeling and a parallel that can be drawn perhaps between the way Serbians had to invest their identity in Yugoslavianism. And could a parallel be drawn away if the Castilians have to invest their identity in overall let's say Spanishism, or how would you say that,
Spanishness.
Yes. And that there is a feeling of perhaps maybe a discourse of betrayal from the side of these communities that are not investing as much, because, and how does the constitution, maybe this ties to Raiko's question, open ground for this if it allows for regionalism to develop, at least in discourse, on the basis of historic identities, which would imply that the Castilian identity is not historical in a sense because it is not constitutionalized as such.
Not only the Constitution allows diverse identities in Spain, but it promotes them. I mean, am I answering your question? The Constitution develops, or wants to develop, promotes the different languages in Spain, and it does. I mean, it's not paper. Schools in Catalan, if they lack something, it's Spanish, no Catalan. Like 80% of the school is. So there's no. They have so much identity, and it's so promoted by the fact of being Catalan. Talking about Catalonia now, I said your question.
But what about the Castilian identity, the core of Spain? Does it get left out in this sense? Because there's so much talk about regional identities in Catalonia. So
the Spanish identity, you mean?
And especially the way that the biggest portion of that identity is itself Castilian in English.
Yes.
Has to be invested in this, but and there's no, let's say, the regional identities aren't invested as much in the Spanish identity. So is there a feeling of resentment in this sense in Madrid?
Not that, I mean, I would say that Spain is one of the less as a whole, one of the less identitarian countries on earth. I mean, we don't have, it's been studied, perhaps because of the years of dictatorship that, for example, the flag was so identified with Franco that it was, I mean, when I was, now it's beginning to appear, but when I was a youngster, if you wore a Spanish flag, you were the devil. They were like fascists. So imagine, I mean, we don't have, also because of the black legend of Spain, we have a certain complex of being Spanish, but not too much. So that has happened for years until, and it's ridiculous, but until we won the World Cup, we wouldn't see a Spanish flag because it was socially, so from one part it's okay, you don't have to be a complex, but from one part it's positive. I mean, we don't, I'm not like a proud country of, and we could be, we have a history, I mean, and we're not that kind of country. So certainly, it's true that the abuse of identity from the peripheral nationalities has caused a little bit of resentment in the rest of Spain. But much more by the fact that I think that some people have felt offended by certain speeches, which are uncertainly supremacist, and that I underline it. I mean, and that's a point when the basis of your nationalism is that you are best because your identity is better than. So then you have people offended, and it's been a lot of years, and now it's beginning to listen. I'm not less than. That's a reaction I didn't have. Yes.
So for the great Castilla. Great Castilla movement.
Well, there are, no, Castilla is a few people, for example, in Andalusia. The result in the recent elections of Vox, which is a party, it's a new party, so we still don't, I don't know if we can call it the ultra, because we still don't know, it's so recent, but it certainly has a part of Spanish nationality purpose, that's for true. So they go to emotions too, which is what nationalism does. So for the moment we didn't have to go for the emotional side of Spain, luckily from my point of view, but it's beginning to happen, yes.
Well, thanks a lot. As I told you, we squash usually everybody who dares to come to here, because it's really great opportunity. As I said, we were just speaking before we started the lecture. At the time in which we are actually speaking is the new, let me say, political crisis is ongoing in Spain. Maybe somebody will ask you after that, and to at the end just finishes with what you see as the future of these internal debates about Catalonia, about the government and so on. But actually, before that, I have two things to ask you. One is, which might be interesting for us. The first one is our perception of the civil war and how do you cope with that in the period of these 40 years. Actually, at that time when Mr. Mignon was here, after the beginning of transition in Serbia, everybody started with, one of the very often mentioned words was like facing with the past and so on. And Mr. Mignon said, I said, well, I'm listening quite a lot here in the Balkans about facing the past. Well, I will tell you my experience when we were drafting constitution, thinking about the peaceful and sustainable transition. Well, the first thing we had in mind is put it back and to try to, at least for a certain time, not to speak about the past and casualties and so on, because otherwise we wouldn't have successful transition. I'm quoting actually what we said. So in that sense, could you give us an overview about how today people perceive that? I mean, there are a lot of people who are, probably still people who were, alive at that time, and a lot of casualties were to the people who lived together as their ancestors, as their heritage, and so on and so on. So, and on the other hand, how state and regions in schools speak about that, how it is perceived, is it issue? Because we saw last year when the turmoils were in Catalonia, at once you saw some people coming at the streets in Madrid and singing Cara del Sol, and so it was really very, how should I say, interesting thing, and people start to speculate about could we again have 39, 38, and so on. And the other thing is Catholicism. It was a big political, social, let me say, financial force during the Franco's time. What was their role in these 40 years? Catholicism, Catholic Church. What was the role of Catholic Church in the last 40, 50 years actually during the transition, and especially today? I mean, in many ways we know, of course, about Opus Dei, which helped quite a lot on one hand for, let me say, modernization in the 50s, and they got very important general importance in the Catholic world and so on. So just briefly, how strong Catholicism today is? We again saw about this debate about abortion a couple of years ago when Partido Popular came to power and so on. And I mean, in financial or in any public way, how important they really are today. Thank you very much, by the way, for really quite straightforward answer.
You just remind me that I had this final picture, which links to the Civil War. These are Manuel Fraga, member of Franco's government, and Santiago Carrillo, the leader of the Communist Party. This was but it was 5 years ago, I think, the anniversary of the previous anniversary of the competences. This is how people feel Civil War, who lived Civil War, deal with Civil War. They completely make peace with that. It's finished, it's done. I would say that all the generations after that, who had the experience of knowing someone from the Civil War, know that that was not even a political fact. I mean, my grandfather one was on the Republican side, and only because the village wasn't there. I mean, as most of the civil wars are not more than 5-10% of people who is ideological, the rest of it, they just, they are there. They're there. So, once it happened and it finished, and I mean, there's things to be solved, of course, but that's it. What happened is that now we have new generations of people who begin to, a language, we call it guerra civilista, and you find kids of 17 years old talking or singing Cara del Sol, or singing, which is completely ridiculous, and adults, and especially people who live the war, are horrorized. That being said, in a legal frame, there's been laws which try to solve certain issues, like people who have found the bodies of which is very legitimate, and I think something that it must be done. But also there's, from time to time, there's movements who try to change the streets, because it was, there's a certain debate on that, but it's superficial, I would say. I mean, most of us, we know about the Civil War, we learned about it in the schools, we had millions of films, of books. I mean, it's because there's people, or certain people who say that we never spoke about the Civil War in Spain. It's like, sorry, I've been all my life reading, watching films, I know everything about the Civil War, which is not. So at school, I don't think it has a certain ideology on that. I mean, it's a civil war and it's quite clear. The problem with the enseñanzas of the teaching in school, which has been raised also in the agenda, is not linked to the guerra civil. It's more, it's in the nationalist ideology. The Civil War is not that much because you cannot create such a lie that the Civil War was a nationalist, because you cannot. They do it with 1740, which nobody knows, which it was a civil war exactly the same, but the nationalists created a myth that it was Catalonia against Spain, which is absolutely ridiculous. But not with the Civil War, because people are alive still, so they couldn't create that lie. So in Civil War, I would say it's studied with normality, and it's not an issue for society. It might be for certain politicians, but not for the society. And the second thing about the church, I think the view from outside is to overestimate the role of the church in Spain. Sorry, but compared to here, or compared to I've been in Israel, the role of religion has we are completely a confessional in that sense.
It's far from...
but even from...
I have to tell you, you are exaggerating the idea that the church is influential here.
It's influential, at least in the social level. In Spain, in a social level, absolutely not. Spain, it's used to be seen like, Poland and Spain, those Catholic countries. Most of the people in Spain don't even go to church on Sundays. They do. It's a very ritual thing. You get baptized. If you get married in the church, because the wedding is like in white and it's nice, but that's it in a social way. So the importance of the church, it's very limited. The legal status with the church, with Vatican, we have this the Concordat, which established that they can, in the public schools, they can teach religion if one wants to, which is debated from time to time, because some people believe that it shouldn't be like that. Me among others. School, I believe that school is separated. So basically, if you want this, they have the space to give like an extra subject about Catholicism. By the way, there's sort of community, as it's a community, a regional, some others give history of religions, not necessarily Catholicism. Other than that, when you pay taxes, there's a box in which you can say, I want my 0.1% to the church, I want it to an NGO, and I want it, and that's it. You have Opus Dei, of course. Opus Dei, it's a kind of lobby in certain powerless people who are from Opus. Yes, is it an organized system of intrusion of the church in the state? No, definitely no. It's people who study. I'm trying to, because sometimes there's a little bit, but mostly Spain seriously is very liberal. Society is very liberal in terms of, I would say. So, we are in certain rituals we are Catholic, but. Christmas, and we do that, but that's it. No, I don't say it. I wouldn't say related with the abortion, which is also a debate. Of course, the position of the church regarding the abortion is obvious and it's legitimate. If they don't defend that, who would? But it's one of the main voices among them, not especially powerful, I would say.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no more question, before we finish, I'd like to share some of my thoughts with you. I think that there is a close connection in a way between Spain and, I was going to say Serbia, but Yugoslavia. Because people are very likely to make parallels. I remember back in the day, I saw Yugoslav Civil War as a Spanish Civil War of World War III, as a big... but it seems to me Syria became that, but it was postponed. But anyhow, I think that this last crisis was very closely watched from Yugoslavia, and the reactions were very interesting, even from official level, where you would have basically Serbs immediately sympathizing with the Castilians, and then Slovenes and Croats being a bit more cautious about things, and on the internet sphere where people are actually more vocal about what they really think. There was the Serbo-Croatian war, concerning Spain, where Croats were for the Catalans and Serbs were for Castilla. And even on the football fan scene, for years, Real Madrid. Yes, Real Madrid was wearing they had Serbian flags in the ultras part of the the fan zone. So these things are interesting here. I was wondering if maybe I'm sure that Yugoslavia is not a big deal for average Spaniard wherever they come from. But is there similar discussion in a way, was there for the last 30 years from the beginning of the Yugoslav crisis, where people would make some parallels, and was this present in the public discourse whatsoever?
No, I mean, I don't think in Spain they reached to do any kind of parallelism with Yugoslavia. Yes, in a very hypothetical way, like see where nationalism ends. The race of nationalism reaches always to bad stuff. That's I would say that in a very hypothetical way. It's true that certain Catalan nationalism tried to. We got the President Torra who went to Ljubljana because they want to do the parallelism, because apparently the Slovenian war was absolutely peaceful and perfect, and that's why they want. And they talked about the Slovenian way.
And there were volunteers in Croatian side.
And in Croatia, of course, the speech is better received. But I don't think that in Spain they have they don't have even the knowledge of what happened. We have a very distorted image of what happened in Yugoslavia. No, that's true. And sometimes I think one of the reasons why Serbians tend to feel also sympathy for the Spanish band, if you can call it like that, is because Serbians also know how bad propaganda is, that sometimes have been over guilty. That's, for example, it happens. How fake propaganda works, and so you try to identify that quicker. It happened to me the same in Israel, who also is blamed for all the bad things of the world. They know when, so that there you can see in other peoples. You sell like easily the body, and you know that there's a scale of grace in the middle. So that's the point. But I'm afraid that Spanish people are not really in the history. They know there was a war here, and it was, but not a lot more than they have the images of Mostar because we had Spanish soldiers there. But there's a few information there. Unfortunately, because I think the story of Yugoslavia should be more well known all over. But
so only football fans are true intellectuals.
Yeah, we know. Well, it's a beginning. Not seriously. The importance of football players and diplomacy is relevant.
Could you finish that? Sorry, with the predictions. So they are about just about the actual crisis. Couple of words.
The only certain thing I know is that people who are being judged since yesterday will have a fair trial, as it couldn't be other way, because I trust the state of law in Spain, and I know very well the judiciary, so I'm completely sure that would be, and probably the result would make nobody happy. So, but that's the role of justice, fortunately. Regarding the political, as long as politicians, as anyone, citizens stay in the way of the law, the constitution, of everything will go fine. And that's what will happen. Who knows? I think we have a huge enough constitution to permit people to live freely and have a wealth and have a democratic country. We had it for 40 years, and I'm sure that we will continue, but I couldn't give you a chance of what's going to happen, which government we'll see. This week is going to be important. The trial just begun, which is, the justice is slow, but it works. And we'll see. I mean, governments come and go, and that's life, and that's parliamentarism, and that's fine. That's democracy. So we will be there. Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
questions.